Welcome to Deeply Rooted, a podcast by Planting Roots, a ministry for military women by military women.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Deeply Rooted podcast. My name's Erin and I am really excited to be jumping into a series called So There I Was, where I get the opportunity to sit down with some awesome women and hear about their stories. If you missed the last episode of the podcast, you can watch it on YouTube or listen to it on any of the podcast platforms. In that episode, we talked about the heart of the title, So There I Was, and what it means and why that's what we're moving forward with. Today, we have Kori Yates on the podcast. Kori is the founder and director of Planting Roots. She's also an author and a speaker. And as far as her military background goes, Kori is a former Marine and current Army wife. And right now they're stationed in Korea. So although it's 6 p.m. here, it's the morning where she is. And so good morning, Kori, and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning. It's so glad to hang out with you this morning.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And I know you've shared this in a few other PR resources before, but since this is the question of the podcast, and because I'm personally super interested in it, let's start with the question, what is your story? Kori, what is your story?
Well, so there I was. I was a Marine, as you just pointed out, and also an Army wife currently, but two very different experiences from the military perspective, I guess, and yet a lot of similarities in the two. And so just as a Marine, I found finding community and finding connection with other Christian military women or other Christian women in uniform was a significant challenge and not something I found on a regular basis. And so had to seek that out very intentionally. And sometimes it could be a super lonely place and challenging place. And so when I transitioned out of active service and over to being an Army wife, I thought, well, it'll be way easier there, right? And it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. It was still a challenge every place that we went. And then the first couple of years, I started to hear certain phrases repeated over and over again of, well, when this deployment's over, we'll do this. Or when we retire, we'll do this. Or at the next duty station, I'll do this. And so it's like everybody was waiting to do something, till later. It's like we're waiting to do what God's called us to do when it was more convenient, when maybe circumstances felt like they were just going to be just right. And I found that everybody was either longing for something they left behind or wishing for something that was yet to be, instead of living in the place where they were. And as Christian military women, I don't think we're immune to those same feelings. And so when I started longing for those things, when I wanted to live in the place where I am very intentionally and to be obedient to Christ in the place where I was today, instead of, trying to plan for what's next or wishing for what I left behind, I thought, well, why can't we just do that together? And so it became a question that repeated itself over and over in my mind. And interestingly enough, it started our very first duty station after we got married, and Planting Roots didn't come along until, 8 years later. And so we had been through 4 duty stations at that point in time before I started to have those conversations with others of, well, how can we help each other do that? And anyway, it was a journey, but that idea of just living today and being obedient today in the place where I am, and how as military women and uniformed women, military wives, how we do that on purpose. Because I think if we're just hoping that it works, or just, hoping that it just naturally happens, I don't think we're successful in that. And but it is super hard over years of time to continue to do that over and over again. It can be a weary place. And so finding people who speak life into us, who speak encouragement into us, who challenge us and keep us accountable in those things, I think it's a vital part of the Christian life, and certainly the Christian military life. And so it's a lesson that God continues to teach me. We get ready to PCS here in the next couple of months, and it's the same thing. I keep telling our kids now, we have to finish well where we are. we have to finish well here because we're already, we're packing out later this week. And so we start to do that whole, in the next duty station we'll do this. And, we start getting so excited about where we're headed that we forget that we still live here. And so even after, we've been married almost 19 years, and after all of that time, we still struggle with, we have to finish where we are. We have to live where we are until we actually get on a plane or get in the car or whatever and go to the next place. And so hopefully, I'm not the only one who feels that way, but it is something that God has had to teach me over and over again, and something that hopefully I've gotten better at, but not for sure I'm like an expert.
Yeah, wow. I think, so I'm brand new in my military journey. I mean, this is our first duty station, so I've only been here, the academy, but then before that, I had lived in Washington State my whole life. I grew up in the same house and didn't move, and so to say that starting a new life where you have to pick up and kind of uproot every couple of years, that was new, and it was scary. And I'm really thankful that I had some good mentors to kind of guide me on the process of like you're saying, being full in where you're at, because if you're trying to be more than one place at once, like for a while at the academy, I missed home so much, and I wasn't full in where I was just because I was hanging on to that life. But I knew God had called me to the academy, and once I fully stepped into that, life got so much better, and I felt connected. I felt rooted there, and so that's really what I want to talk about next. Is I think when I first heard the name Planting Roots for a military ministry, I was a little bit confused because, it seems almost contradictory. I feel like the idea of moving every couple of years seems like you're not really planting roots, and it's not what the typical person would think of as planting roots. And so I really want you to dive into that because I've come to understand it now, that I'm living it, and again, I've been mentored in it. But I want you to explain to our listeners, like why the title, where did you first think of that title, and then why has it been the one that has stuck?
Well, the title came after much discussion years ago. Before Planting Roots started, we were living in Maryland and started having conversations with some ladies at the chapel. We did Bible study together and things like that. And so we started talking about this idea of, what if there was this connecting point of these uniformed women and military wives around the world? What if there was a place where they could have community, where they could intersect with each other, where we could equip each other and encourage each other, and across services, and find those people every place that we go. And so we started having these conversations, and it was the start of this idea of planting roots in my spirit and my soul. And as I started to say, yes, that's a good idea. We could maybe do something like that. The Lord and I had multiple conversations, and I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. I don't have the skill sets for those things. I don't. And so, if it is really something that you want to do, you're going to have to do something about that because I got nothing. And it was interesting in those next couple of weeks when I finally got to the point where I said, okay, if this is what you want to do, I'm in. I don't know how. I don't feel like I can do it by myself. You're going to have to teach me how to do this. And within those next couple of weeks, I actually had 5 or 6 ladies that I hadn't talked to. Some of them I hadn't ever met in person. Some I hadn't seen in like a year and a half or so, and were people I'd crossed paths with, but never actually. They weren't like my friends, my best friends from some duty station or whatever. And then one that I taught Bible study with there at Fort Meade, and another that I had made friends with. But very kind of this conglomerate of people, 5 or 6 of them, all within the next couple of weeks, all called me and said, hey, I'd just like to sit down with you or touch base with you or catch up with you and talk about, women's ministry in the military and kind of where you are in that and that kind of stuff. And after 3 of those phone calls, I'm like... Maybe. So anyway, what I ended up doing is calling them all back and saying, well, instead of meeting you all separately, can we just have this meeting together? I know y'all don't know each other. I'm kind of the connecting point for all of you, but what if we just did that? And so one was in Arizona and one was in Louisiana and a couple of them there in Maryland and one down in Virginia. And anyway, so we met... and I said, this is what I feel like the Lord wants us to do. What do y'all think? And that conversation is what led to, well, what do we call it? And you would laugh because this idea, our foundational scripture of Jeremiah 17:8 is where we landed first. For she, it says he, but I'm going to use she, but she will, be like a tree planted by the water that sends its roots out by the stream. It doesn't fear when heat comes. It never fails to bear fruit. This idea of what life could be like if we planted our roots in the right place. And so we started having conversations around that and realized that, we can plant roots as Christian military women because we plant our roots in our Savior instead of the dirt where we live. And, when we plant them in the dirt where we live and the tangible things of that place and even the relationships of that place, and then we get picked up and moved again, it really feels like we're being, our roots are just being ripped out, which can be a super painful place. Yeah. But if your roots are in Christ, then your roots don't move, they don't change, and they stay in the same place. And so that idea of not having that, the transitions still happen, and we still get weary, and we still struggle, every time, because you have to build community, and and some places are harder than others, and all of those things still come into play. But Scripture tells us if our roots are planted, if we are planted by the stream, if we send our roots out to that true living water, then we still thrive. We still bear fruit. We still withstand drought. We still stand at the end of the day. And so those discussions are where planting roots came from. And it seemed like kind of an anomaly at the time, too, of does that even make sense, and how does it tie into military life? It was this whole conversation, but it's I love the concept of learning to plant our roots in our Savior instead of the dirt where we live. And it is something that God has honed in my life over and over again over the years. And hopefully He's used it to teach others and challenge them to do the same thing. And hopefully it has helped you to even think about, what does that look like, and how do I do that as I walk through military life? Because you've still got a ways to go. Still got a couple years in you.
Yep. Yeah, I really like that you started out that story with talking about how God put an idea in your heart, but you didn't know how to do it. But just because you didn't know how to do it, that didn't mean that you didn't do it. It meant that you were obedient to the calling, said yes to God, and then, honestly, you were in a place where you had to rely on Him in order to start what now is planting roots. And I think that's kind of also the heart of this So There I Was series, is looking back at our stories. We can see how God worked and His faithfulness. But sometimes it's scary looking forward because we can't see all those intricate details and we don't know how He's going to show up. But this is encouragement, I think, to me first and foremost, but I hope to everyone else too, just that even if you don't know what the future looks like, if God is putting something on your heart and others are surrounding you to affirm and help you and encourage you in that, then you never know what God's going to do with it. And in this case, you definitely took it and ran with it. Because it's become something pretty cool.
I love the fact that you say you look back, and I think that's my favorite thing about the longer we walk with the Lord, and even the longer we walk in military life. I think they kind of weave hand in hand, especially in our military community. But the longer we do that, the more we see God's track record of what He's done and how He works, and His faithfulness and His goodness to us. And I think when we do that, like you said, when we look back, it gives us the courage to do the next thing. Because, I know He showed up that time, and I know He showed up that other time, and remember that time He did this. And so I love the fact that you're looking at those stories, because I think that looking back at those stories really pours courage into us to keep going in the way that He calls us, even when we don't know what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. And then another thing I wanted to touch on too was that I think it's super important to talk about the fact that we're planted in the Lord. When we're planted in the Lord, He gives us the strength, and He is the one who allows things to flourish. But that doesn't mean that it didn't require work. Just because you said yes to God, it doesn't mean it stops there. And so I would love it if you would touch on just the work and effort it took, and how you push past the obstacles because sometimes I think we view obstacles as God like redirecting us, but just because something is hard, it doesn't mean God hasn't called us to it. So is there anything along the way that's just been challenging, but that you've pushed through?
There have been a lot of challenging, there have been some challenging moments, some of them involving people, because we're all Christian and we all have a heart to serve the Lord doesn't mean we all have the same ideas or the same thought on how we go about that. And so sometimes we just run into each other. And so learning to mitigate those things and learning to find the core of what God's calling us to do, and recognizing the differences in each other and the gift that those differences can be. It has taught me a lot about relationship, about people, about, learning to hold a standard and still give grace at the same time. It is a place where I have had to grow in interacting and learning, what is truly important to me, what is the thing I'm willing to fall on my sword over, and what is something I can let go. So that's one of those things that, and we had a time years ago, early in Planting Roots, where that kind of came to a head, and it was a wearying time because it was a couple of months of back and forth and conversations, and I didn't know the right answer, and so you just keep like trying and having conversations, and it just felt like it wasn't successful. But looking back on that season of Planting Roots, I also see how the Lord used it to grow us, both as individuals and as an organization. He pushed us to do some things differently, to reorganize some things, to hone those priorities and goals. So that was probably the first thing. The second thing is we launched Planting Roots in like the fall of 2014, and a couple months later, like February of 2015, my husband left for a deployment for about, I don't know, 12, 13 months, something like that. He went to Iraq. And so I had two kids, right? I don't know what they were at the time, 5 and 8, I guess. They were young at the time, but so I homeschooled and they were home and that kind of stuff. And so our schedule when Kyle was gone, I would get up early, I would do all the work, I would, feed breakfast to my kids, and we'd do some school, I'd do some more work while they played outside and that kind of stuff. I put them to bed at night, I'd do some more work. So it was a lot of Planting Roots in that year. We built a board, we became a 501c3, we held 2 events that first year, we, did some online Bible study. It was a busy year. And then Kyle came home, and then I'm supposed to focus on him, right? Because we are married, and so it's really handy to actually spend time together. And so he went to a conference with me, a Planting Roots event with me, because he just wanted to see what was going on and how it all worked, because he'd been gone for a year and a lot had happened in that time. And so I went, and he went with me, and we were in Texas. And I remember because 2 of our ladies at Planting Roots, they said, hey, can we chat with you and Kyle for a few minutes, later today? And I'm like, yeah, we can totally do that. And so they pulled us aside into this private room, and sat us down. And the first thing we did is look at Kyle, and they said, so how's y'all's home life since you've been back? And I'm like, I was like, could we not ask him? I mean, really? Y'all have never met the man ever before in your whole life. And, because we just hadn't found that balance of time and effort, and, something I was struggling with, and I didn't know how to manage those things. And Kyle was trying to give grace. He'd been gone for a year, and, so he was trying to reintegrate. A month later, we were moving to Germany. So we were working an Oconus move at the time. It was just a lot. Yeah. And at the time it kind of pricked me a little bit, because I'm like, why are you even asking? I mean, y'all just need to butt out of my marriage. You need to butt out of my whatever. You know what I mean? We will figure it out. But I came to understand within those next few months the gift that they were to me. And that accountability to hold me to a standard and to call me out and say, you're doing God's work and you're doing wonderful things, and we believe in the calling of your life, but you have a calling that comes before it. Mm-hmm. and you need to take care of that too. And so the Lord has brought women like that into Planting Roots and into my life to be able to do that for me, and such a gift that I have learned that accountability can be in those friendships. And as much as sometimes I want to push back or say, mind your own business, it is such a gift to have friends and coworkers and co-laborers in Christ to be able to do that to me and to us, as a family, and to keep us accountable to what God's called us to in our home, as well as broader ministry, and to keep us focused. So those are probably the two biggest challenges. And looking back, they've also been two of the most encouraging moments of ministry, and even the past few years as a family and as a couple, for our marriage. So
yeah, within my first year of marriage, we've almost been married for a year now. I think that same kind of idea of just accountability and the importance of it has just been so clear. I always say that marriage has been hard, not necessarily because of my husband's sin or because he's annoying or makes me mad or anything, but because I realize my own sin, and it brings up things in me that I don't want to see. And we've spent a good part of this year apart from each other, both on deployments, and sometimes it's easier when we're not together because I can just live life in my utopia however I want to. But then when he comes back, he challenges me to grow, and I think it's so the same, if not more so, with other women who know exactly what we're walking through and have experienced what we're experiencing in our marriage and the military. They hold you accountable, and sometimes you have growing pains, but I am so thankful for the people too who have called me out and kept me on track and shared their stories. Again, just the whole idea of sharing our stories of what they may have done not perfectly in the past, that they just want to see me do better. So I love that part of community. It's not always comfortable, but it's such a blessing.
It is really a gift, because I think it's truly a testament to their love and their care for us, because they love me for who I am, but also such a gift that they see glimpses of what I can be instead of just who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like, they tell me how great I am today, which, who doesn't love words of affirmation, right? But they also see the ways that I can be better, and they challenge me to be better. And so when we started Planting Roots, those women that came around us and the women I've gotten to work with over the years are I could have never imagined, the opportunity to do life, to do ministry with the most phenomenal group of Christian military women, or women in particular. Women's ministry is not always like smooth sailing. It can bring it. I never really felt called to women's ministry because I'm like, too much drama and too many things going on. But Planting Roots is probably the most amazing place I've ever worked in women's ministry, where everybody really is on the same page. We have run-ins every now and then, but it's usually more of, well, who's supposed to do this instead of this, and working out some of those logistical things. We rarely have real disagreements or real conflict that goes on in ministry, and it just amazes me. It's like God's gift to us because he knows I want to avoid conflict anyway, so maybe he's just being super nice. But truly an amazing group of women that I am grateful that God challenges us and pushes us, because if he hadn't, I just imagine what I would have missed. And that would make me very sad too, because I would not be the same either if I had not had the opportunity to be with them.
Yeah, what you said really reminds me of the quote, which I'm sure many people have heard, but it's that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And if you're willing to say yes, he will equip you, and if he wants it to flourish and to survive, then he'll help you push through the challenges and get over the hurdles. And one other thing that I was reminded of too when you were talking is just the different forms of ministry and what ministry can look like. It can look like many different things. You talk about doing PR stuff, you talk about homeschooling your kids, you talk about your husband. And one thing that I honestly struggled with earlier this year is just the desire to just do full-time ministry, and I just didn't feel like my time out on a boat in the middle of the ocean was necessarily like fruitful for God's kingdom, and I felt like I could do so much more if I was like, on land in a church. But what I've learned is that, again, where God has placed me, if I'm rooted in Him, then there are so many opportunities for full-time ministry where I'm at. And so I was wondering if you would touch on that a bit too.
Well, I will tell you, I have had interesting moments of ministry opportunities over the years, and places where I didn't expect. But the Lord has been so super faithful, because He really, I have started to see our life as a mission field. And if you had asked me in high school what I was going to do when I grew up, I was going to be a foreign missionary. And then, I joined the military, married a military guy, and that was really not what I was planning. But, he has taken us all over the world in that. And, even in the United States, in different people groups. But ministry has looked a lot of different ways. And sometimes I think we could go through a multitude of examples. But our time here in Korea has probably been one of the most interesting times, I guess, in ministry, because usually what I love to do, as you well know, because we do Planting Roots, if I have the opportunity to share a devotional, or to, speak at an event, or to do those kinds of things, plan a retreat, I am like totally in and love those things. Ask me how often I've gotten to do that here, and I'm like, Jesus and I had like conversations, in those first few months but I feel like this is what I'm good at. I feel like this is, my sweet spot, something that you called me to do. And He had to keep reminding me, not in this season. This, I have something different. And so in Kyle's job right now, a lot of what I do, well, we still homeschool our kids, but a lot of what I do with Kyle's job is I help support him, and so he takes care of soldiers. That's what he does, right? And so I help him take care of soldiers. And so that has been a lot of our focus in these past couple of years, which is a really humbling place for me to be, because it looks a lot like, decorating for a ball, or, providing food for, a get together that they're having. So it's like food service and decor and, what I mean? Like things that not really my favorite. And, and at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know that I'm super good at those things, but we just keep showing up. And as we get ready to finish out here, we have found that those things have reaped relationships, and those relationships have allowed us to speak into their lives. From I just had a wonderful chat the other day with a young soldier who, she just got here like 2 months ago. So this is her very first duty station, and she very first time away from the continental United States. She's from Georgia, and so she had never been really. She'd been in the Southeast and that kind of stuff, but never overseas. And so those relationships have become, super important. But they come because we do have get-togethers that, they feel special because there's balloons and there's whatever, and, and they provide food, which means they all sit around and they talk to each other, and we get to talk to them. And so ministry here has looked very different than ministry in other places, and truly not something like, if you said, what do you feel called to do? I'm like, food service is not it. It's like, please let me run from that. But the Lord really does use every season to allow us to just grow the kingdom in the place where we are. And sometimes it doesn't look like we thought it did, and sometimes it doesn't use our strengths that we thought we had. But at the end of the day, it's about people and us building those relationships so that we can share Christ with them. Because if they don't know that I actually love them and care for them, then why would they listen to me anyway? And so I know a multitude of ladies have struggles with, in some duty stations, it doesn't feel like, there's anything for me here, or that I'm really actually making a difference, or that it really, what I've done actually impacts anything. And I would beg to differ. If you simply seek out what the Lord would have for you and just be obedient in that, it can be humbling and a little bit of a struggle. I totally get that because we went through that the first 6 or 8 months. But once you start to rest in that and realize that God will use that anyway, even if it didn't look like you thought it would, it is, ministry can look like a ton of different things. And it's just finding that place, and those things in each place that you're planted. And, it's just not always going to look the same. But let me say this, because I think because they don't look the same, it pushes us back to seek out the Lord. Because if they all look the same, we just check boxes of, okay, well, at this duty station, then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And God's like, that's not how this works. This works as a relationship with Him as well, which means every time we have to go back to Him and say, okay, what do you have for me in this place and for this season, and let me do that.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Man, can you talk about your book, Olive Drab Pom Poms?
That was a long time ago. Becoming a military wife was a transition because I used to wear a uniform. I used to have rank, and moving into the world of military life, or military wife life, I guess, was an interesting place to be because all of a sudden, I don't have any authority. I don't really have a space anywhere. And so you start to struggle with this balance, and I don't know if you have in married life, but early in married life, you struggle with this balance of, well, I want to be me, right, and have my calling and do these things, but I also want to support my husband, and because we are in this together, and what does submission look like, and what does encouraging him look like, and what is, all of those kinds of words that get thrown around in married life and discussions, and how do you balance the two? And so Olive Drab Pom Poms is learning to cheer him on while I'm changing the world. So it's learning to encourage him and be there for him at the same time I fulfill my own calling, and I have the different callings from him that we learn to balance. And over the years we've had to learn to do that for each other, seeing that in each other. But it was a good reminder to me that I do support Kyle, and I am his biggest cheerleader. But just like cheerleaders in any other capacity, like in college, they cheer on the team, but they also have these competitions of their own that they do, and skill sets of their own, and places where they shine on their own without a football team and without a baseball team and without a whatever. The cheerleaders still have their own space these days, and as military wives, we do the same thing. We cheer him on, and we help them, and we encourage them, but God has callings for us as well. We don't get drowned under the umbrella of who he is or what he is. And I think as military wives, sometimes we struggle with, especially if we don't wear a uniform at all. It means sometimes our names aren't on orders. They are when we go overseas, right? Because, they have to say that you can actually go with them, which is very helpful for plane tickets and things like that. But most of the time, your name's not on any kind of orders. It's not like you have a designated place to belong. It's not like, and so sometimes you can feel like you're just tagging along, and that your life isn't really your own. Your life revolves around him, and I would beg to differ. The calling and the place where God plants you it's not for him alone. It's for you both, to do what God's called you to in that place. And just because his name is on the orders and yours isn't, doesn't mean your calling is any less important. And so the Olive Drab Pom Poms was kind of that learning to balance both, and how marriage works in that, and how you can help each other to do that. So it's lessons Kyle and I learned from our first few years of marriage. It's a growing process, is it not? I mean, y'all are newly married. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I know it was published a while ago, but I brought it up because one, it's something personally that even though I'm in, it's still, I'm probably going to get out and he'll stay in. And so just that feeling of, okay, like, will I feel less purposeful? Will I feel less than in a way. And I also do know some friends who are wives of their husbands in the military, and I feel the same way. Like, okay, like I know that my calling is to, serve my husband, but is there more? And connecting to like the previous question I asked, I just wanted to emphasize that like God very specifically calls us to certain places, to certain roles for a reason. And yes, we can find ministry in being a good wife, but also like there's so much more if we turn to the Lord that He has called us to. And it requires looking to Him for strength and looking to Him for that calling, because sometimes we're not going to find it just on our own. So I wanted to bring it up. I know it was a long time ago, but I thought it was a cool resource to point out. And then you did mention that Planting Roots was founded in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. So I wanted to ask, what vision do you have for the future, and where are you thinking Planting Roots is going to go?
Well, I have lots of visions, but the biggest one is there are about 250,000 Bible-believing, Christ-following women in uniform and military wives around the world, in the U.S. military. It doesn't include any other foreign service or anything like that. And at Planting Roots, we only connect about 15 to 20,000 of them currently, whether it's social media or a newsletter or they've been to an event or something along those lines. And so my vision, my heart for Planting Roots is that all 250,000 of them are connected to each other, whether it's virtually or in person or whatever, where we're equipping each other and encouraging each other to do what God's called us to do. Because in my mind, if we do that, if we are all wholeheartedly obedient in the place where we are, we become the greatest missionary movement of our time. And it just, why would we want to not do that? I mean, it'd be crazy not to do that. And so it is just naturally doing, answering the call that God has on our life today. And so my vision for Planting Roots is that we actually get to the point where all of us are connected and where we are talking to each other and encouraging each other, where we're sharing resources with each other, where so that we can equip each other. We're teaching each other to do what God's already taught us, because God's already taught you things that you can teach somebody else, and He's taught me things that I can teach others, and so we learn from each other, which I think is such a valuable thing, and especially in the uniqueness of military life. But starting to look at where God puts us, I mean, we are truly on every continent and ocean around the world, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there are orphanages that the kids and I have visited, off post here in Korea. There are places that we've been able to go that are only because God's put us here for this season and this time. And so my biggest vision for Planting Roots is that we would truly connect all of those women to equip and encourage each other. And then that we would all be wholeheartedly obedient in the place where we are. So to do that, we obviously do resources and events and online community and things like that. But at the end of the day, Planting Roots can do everything that it wants to do, but only the Lord can bring us all together. And so it is my prayer that He would do that. And if He uses Planting Roots to do that, then that's super humbling, number one. But number two, what an honor and a privilege we would have as military women to truly make such a huge difference in the kingdom, simply because we did it together.
Yeah. Wow. Talk about purpose. So much purpose. Well, Kori, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And for all of you listening, you heard Kori talk about it here. The vision is to share this community with so many other people. So if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast on YouTube, share it with a friend. Share it with a group chat that you have. Share it with more people. And make sure you visit our website at plantingroots.net and follow us on Instagram to see all the other resources that we have already and that we have coming your way soon.
Thank you for joining us on Deeply Rooted, a podcast by Planting Roots, a ministry for military women by military women. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us on all social media platforms, or drop over to our website, www.plantingroots.net, to sign up for our Planting Roots newsletter. You don't want to miss the inspirational and practical resources developed with you in mind.